Today, let's make a hair bow in two different sizes. Welcome, I do sewing and DIY related content, and today's pattern is all about making a hair bow. The best part for this is there's a whole Etsy pattern available as well for both sizes of the bow that we're going to be going over. So be sure to check the link in the description if you want to see that. To start off though with this hair bow, you are going to want some sort of woven material. Now if you're using a very lightweight woven material and making that regular size or that larger hair bow, I would highly recommend adding some lightweight interfacing to it just so that you're able to move the bow a little bit more. It has a little more structure, but again, there's nothing wrong with a floppy bow if you just want to use whatever woven material you have on hand. The first step though is we are going to be cutting out the loops for our bow. So for this, if you're making the regular size, you are going to want to cut out two 20-inch by 3.5-inch strips. So as you can see here, I have actually folded this over, so this is like a 10-inch fold. So that's 20 inches, and then I did 7 inches, and then I'm just dividing this in half so I can get those two different strips that I'll need. The pattern itself also provides another dimension in case you want to make that mini size bow. In addition, you are going to need one more rectangle. So this is a smaller rectangle. It's about 6 by 3.5 inches, and this is going to be what we'll be folding into the middle to get that bow-like shape. And again, all those dimensions are listed in the pattern. So once you have all of that cut out, go ahead and add your interfacing following manufacturer's instructions if you need to do that. Next, take your long rectangles and we're going to be folding them in half, so hot dog style. So this is very similar to how you would actually do that initial fold if you were making a scrunchie, and you're just going to be pinning up this one long edge as well as those two short edges. And then in the middle, you are going to want to leave a 2-inch gap if you are making the regular size bow. If you're making the mini size bow, it's going to be about an inch, inch and a quarter inch gap. And what we're going to be doing is we are going to be marking this as a spot where we are not sewing. So we're sewing one of those short edges all the way to that first mark. So I use 2 pins to denote that, leaving that gap and then sewing the rest of this rectangle and then that other short edge. So essentially that part in the middle is going to be unsewn. This is going to allow us to turn this rectangle right side out when we're actually constructing our bow. And then I'm going to repeat all of those same steps for the pinning for the second long rectangle as well. Now for the short rectangle, we can go ahead and pin this up. So on either long edge, you're going to fold it in about a 1/2 inch, and we are just going to be pinning this up so that it stays in place and we're able to then take a seam. So we're going to be doing this for both long edges on this rectangle. The two short edges we can leave for now and we'll worry about them after we have already taken that one seam. So once it's all pinned up, you can now take this over to your sewing machine. This is just going to be a regular straight stitch. You're going to be sewing both of those long edges of the shorter rectangle. So as you can see here, I have one done, so I'm just going to repeat this for the second side. Just sew it up so that both of them are in place. The raw edges are gone from the outside the way you look at it. And now for one of the short edges, we only choose for one, we're going to be folding this in about 1/2 inch. So as you can see here, I folded it up about 1/2 inch, and I'm just going to now pin this in place. And then I'm going to be taking a seam across. Now this is just going to allow us to have a really nice and neat way to create our bow, and we don't need to worry about that other edge because we're not actually going to be seeing it. So we only need to worry about 3 of those edges, which we now have all of them sewn, and this is ready to be put to the side, and we're going to start on our longer rectangles. So now I'm just going to start sewing these up, so starting at one of those short edges, sewing all the way, and then when I get to the corner, I'm going to pivot my fabric, which is where I put my needle into the machine, lift up my presser foot and then move my fabric 90 degrees and then continue sewing with the presser foot back down. And I'm going to continue sewing all the way till I get to that mark, which is going to tell me that I need to backstitch and then take out and stop the seam. So we are now done sewing this first part. So I'm going to, as you see, remove the pins, remove the needle, and then I'm just going to cut the threads, and then I'm going to start back up at the second mark, and then I'm just going to continue sewing from there. So at this point, you should have a 2-inch gap of fabric that is not being sewn, and that's going to allow us to be able to turn this right side out. Once you get all the way through, you're going to pivot your fabric again at the end, and you'll see that we have this portion that is not sewn, and now we're just going to repeat that for the second strip. Once you have all of that done, you can go through and just trim any of those corners of extra fabric if you have any extra fabric that you want to remove, being sure not to cut through the seam. And then you're just going to turn this right side out. So for this, you can use your hands, as you can see that I'm doing here. but you can also use a turning tool if you have any type of like sharp point, like a chopstick or a pencil, even a pen. Just be sure the pen's closed so you don't get the ink on your fabric. Then you're just turning this right side out. So now I'm going to repeat this for the second side as well as the second strip so that both of those rectangles are now nice and turned. They look great and they're ready to now be pressed. So I'm just going to press everything so it's nice and flat and smooth, and you'll see that we have that gap we still need to worry about. All the steps so far are also the same for the mini bow. So if you're doing that mini bow pattern, you're just pressing everything out at this point. And now for our gap, I am just going to pin this up using 2 pins, and then we're going to top stitch all the way around the bow. So the top stitching does 2 things. It adds a nice decorative touch all the way around, but it also closes off that gap that we had before, so you don't have to worry about it being opened. Now when doing the top stitching, you're going to have to pivot your fabric at different points, and sometimes those corners can be hard to sew over. So one way to do this is to actually put something behind your presser foot. So as you saw there, I just had that green seam roller that I had behind my presser foot, and it allowed me to get up and over that hump of the corner and continue sewing on. So that's just a little hint if you do get stuck on any of those corners, especially with this mini bow, it may get stuck on those corners, and you can try something like that out by adding that cardboard or fabric behind it, and it will help you get over the hump. Now it's time to start making our bow. So with those 2 rectangles, you're going to fold one to the right and one to the left. As you can see I've done here, pick those folds up and then place them into an X shape as above that I've done. And then you're going to take your smaller rectangle and just move this over the center of it, so make sure everything's aligned and nice and centered in the middle, and then just wrap that rectangle around to create the bow shape. So at this point, this is a lot of just figuring out how you would like your bow to look. For the mini bow, there's not too much that you can kind of play around with, as there's not that much fabric. And then I just used a pin to hold it in the back, and then we're going to hand stitch that closed. So as you can see here, I have threaded my needle, and then I'm just going to add a knot into the thread at the back. There's lots of different ways you can add knots to your thread. This is just one way that I like to do it. And then I am going to begin whip stitching this closed. So I will include a video on how to do a whip stitch. This is just a really simple stitch. We don't need it to be an invisible stitch by any means, as you're not actually going to be able to see the back. So as you can see, I'm just going through. I did knot it at the beginning just for extra stability. I'm being sure that the stitch is not being seen through the front of the bow. You really only want it to be able to be seen on the back. And then I'm just going to sort of tweak and move the different pieces of the bow around in case I want to do any last minute adjustments, which you can definitely just hand stitch if you want some of the loops to be up a little bit more. You know, this is where it really gets to be a little more creative and artistic for how you want your bow to look. So as you can see here, I'm just going through those pieces of the bow at the front and just almost doing like a little tack or a little hand stitch just to hold it in place so that it looks more bow-like, but this is very optional and you really don't even need to do this step. It's just more about what type of bow you want it to look like. Once you have it to your liking, you can go ahead and just finish off that stitch and then remove the thread by just cutting it loose after you've knotted it. And then you can either add a bobby pin or you could add some sort of barrette into the back and just clip it on. For the mini bow, I thought that the bobby pin was a really cute touch as it's not too overpowering for it. Now for our regular size bow, we are going to be constructing it the same way as the mini bow. So taking those 2 long rectangles and folding one so the folds to the right and one so the folds to the left, and then bringing them together and creating that X shape so that the 2 folds are at the top and then those 2 tails are at the bottom. Once I have it like this, I'm then going to get that 3rd rectangle and just wrap it around the middle so that I can create my bow shape. Now at this point, again, this is all about you can do any sort of rearranging you would like to with those 2 bows, loops, making sure that everything is laying how you would like. You can see that adding the interfacing did give it a little more structure and stability, and then I'm just going to go through the back here and whip stitch this all together to make sure that it is being held in place. At this point, you can see that you have like all of those layers of the bow, which can also be a really cute look as it is. So you could leave it like this if you just wanted it to be done, or if you wanted to give it more of that really bow defined shape. As you can see here, I've started to essentially just pull them up a little bit more and then have the loops go down a little bit more, and then you can just hand stitch this into place, very similar to how we did for that mini bow. So just taking your needle and thread and doing a couple little hand stitches to just hold these loops where they are. being sure that you can't really see them from the outside, and this is especially true if you use matching thread. You're not really going to be able to see them anyways. So this just helps it to kind of hold its shape a little bit more and gives you a very much of a bow feel. Once you have that done, you can then just add either that bobby pin or clip or whatever you like to use on the back. The best part about this is you can either choose to sew it in or not sew it in, since the way that we did that loop in the back. So for this one, I am going to sew it in, and then at this point, your bows are complete. I absolutely love how these turned out. I think it's so fun. The mini one is also great for kids or for dolls. So if you want to make like a doll and me version for the child in your life, you could definitely do that. I love how both turned out though. Again, there is an Etsy pattern available, so check the link in the description if you want to get all the details for that. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks.